It's a real pleasure to be here with Mary Erdoes. I think we're going to have an interesting conversation, and I'm hoping that you're all going to participate in that conversation in a little while. But before that, I want to ask Mary some questions, and I'm going to pull a bit of a switcheroo on you. I'm not going to dive right into asset and wealth management. I'd like to see Mary open up a little bit about herself and how it came to be that we find her here on the stage as the CEO of Asset and Wealth Management at JP Morgan, managing tens of thousands of employees, managing $3 trillion for your clients. How did that come about?
I'm more interested to know how it came about that the guy that wrote the book, How Big Banks Fail, is interviewing me this morning. So this should be fun, I hope. I am so honored to be here. I do have to say, because this is a group of incredibly esteemed people who have a strong affinity for Stanford University. I was born in Mountain View Hospital while my father was going to graduate school here. And I unfortunately wasn't raised here. We then moved to Chicago. And so when I got out of school on the East Coast and worked for a couple of years in investment banking. By the way, all the firms he mentioned are like all out of business that I used to work for. So Bankers Trust is no longer Bankers Trust. It's now Deutsche Bank, and we'll have to see how that goes. But so when I was, after my 2-year analyst stint on Wall Street, I wanted to go to business school to try and figure out what it was I was going to do with my life. And there was only one place in the world that I wanted to go. And that didn't work out so well for me. And I'm still so mad. I am just still so mad. So I've got 3 more chances. I have 3 little girls, a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 11-year-old. I drag them out here as often as I can. I show them all the fancy stuff. And with any luck, we'll see what happens with them.
Your 16-year-old is doing gymnastics. Did I have that right?
Yes, she comes out to the gymnastics center, which is right across the street here, which, by the way, if you don't know, has a fabulous program for young ladies. And so we love coming out here every summer, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. We're going to go to the Stanford UCLA game down in LA on Sunday morning, so should be good fun. Anyway, so I have 3 young girls, and I have no idea how I ended up doing what I'm doing, but I'm literally have no idea. I also was a mathematics major.
May have had something to do with it.
But for those of you there's some of you in school here in this room, and I didn't know what I was going to get to do with my life until my senior year of college. Like now, you get recruited when you're a sophomore. Don't you know what you're going to do? Have you rotated through enough of these places? Have you applied to school on the 3rd day that you're in classes for the next summer? And so it's just it's a whole other thing. I went along with life the way that you just did. You just applied to jobs. You sort of worked as hard as you could, and if you gave it your all and you worked a little bit harder than everybody else, maybe you would succeed and go up the ranks. And
in your case, it happened very rapidly.
It happened very fast, and you need a lot of hard work, which I am known to work super hard, but you have to have a lot of luck. So when I started on Wall Street was the crash of in the late 80s, the stock market crash. A whole bunch of people got fired. There were like 3 of us left, so like what else were they going to do but ramp us up really quickly? So baptism by fire, learned a lot, went to another business school on the East Coast, and at that time, that's when I was like, I don't know. I didn't even know what a cash flow statement was. I just knew I had to program it into the Excel spreadsheet and do the stuff. But I didn't really get the concept of what I was doing to finance companies around the world. And so when I was in between my 2 years of business school, this is for all of you who are in school with your parents who tell you, you have to get this job and this job and this job. I said, like, to heck with that. I'm going to Hollywood. And I applied for an internship at Paramount Pictures, which may have been the single best job I've ever had in my whole life. Because you go to the canteen for like an hour and a half in the middle of the day and you just watch movie stars come in and out and have their lunch. And then I went back to the business office and ran like regressions on DVD sales in Europe versus movie sales, which of course meant nothing because all of that's gone. But here I am, and shortly after that, I started at JP Morgan, and one of my great mentors and people who really sort of helped me to think about the world from an economic point of view is right here in this audience, Mr. John Lipsky. And you get blessed in life with working in firms that can, you can surround yourself with people that are just so incredibly smart and also will take the time to teach you and to go through things. And so who would have known that we were teeny little JP Morgan then, and today I've got 25,000 people, a lot of assets, and I'm the smallest part of JP Morgan Chase with that. So it's a whole different world. I feel very blessed to be doing it, but I have no idea how I got there.
It's far too modest. Let's keep it at a personal level for a little bit longer, and just to help everybody understand what kind of a job you have, just take us through a typical day at the office. I'm sure every day is different, but what are the kinds of things that you do, responsibilities that you have? Describe
Yes.
your job.
So Tom Montag and I were standing in the back of the room comparing notes, and one of the people at one of the tables in front of said, "Isn't that like collusion? Two of you sitting there talking about these things." My day is basically your agenda from this morning. I'm not exaggerating.
Cyber risk.
Yesterday morning, we had an entire risk management meeting about cannabis stocks, right? And how, as a global firm, how do you operate within the constraints of U.S. law? U.S. law, we're governed by federal law. There's state law. These things are like legal in some places, not legal at the federal level, legal across the border in Canada. How do you deal with that? How are we not going to get in trouble for money laundering when somebody owns a cannabis stock and receives dividends from one of the companies that now crosses the border and does. I mean, the most mind-numbing conversation you could ever have for an hour and a half, to which my boss didn't want to stay for the whole thing. So there's a level of intenseness and scrutiny that big firms should go through, but it's very hard and it's very difficult. And then cyber is every day a portion of our day. We spend almost we spend $800 million a year on cyber defense just at JP Morgan, and the examples that Rachel was giving, those are daily. And it's not like, so you imagine a big firm like ours and many of the big firms that are represented in this room. Of course we have enough money to work on cyber. That doesn't mean we'll be fully protected, but we're going to work as hard and fast as we can. We partner with some of the most successful firms out here. We partner with the U.S. government. We partner with other governments around the world. We're always trying to have the new technologies, the latest things that have broken through. We get a lot of insights from the government. We share a lot of insights with the government. That's not where the problem is. The problem is like your nice little lawyer, accountant person, and so you're so vulnerable, and we have to help. We bank half the households in the United States of America, so it's just like a full frontal attack on who's like coming with bad credentials into the bank and trying to do that. So there's at least an hour or so on cyber. And then my day job, that's firm level. My day job is running the asset and wealth management business of JP Morgan Chase, and that's the business that I love and thrive on, because that's where we get to manage money for some of the most interesting people in the world, some of them in this room, great entrepreneurs who start companies, who disrupt things, people who run some of the major pension funds, sovereign wealth funds around the world, but also we manage money for the first savers, right? The person who's going to do that first saving. And so trying to figure out how are we making the right investments, what's happening in the market, what's the right thing to guide them on so that when they retire in 30 years from now, they don't have the stomach-wrenching feeling that a lot of people do today, because either they rode through the great financial crisis and that wiped out everything, and then they just never re-risked back in, and so that game over for them in terms of the monetary ability to support them. and trying to educate people to do it at a much younger age. And so all of that we get super excited about. Investment committee is probably the best part of my day. We talk about what's working, what's not. Lots of things don't work, but eventually if you have enough really smart people around the room, you can figure out what's going to work over the long period of time, and then new innovative products and digital AI, how to think about the whole world of AI, which sounds so scary. It's like all of you in the room have done this, like if-then statements back then on an Excel spreadsheet, right? It's just a series of if-then statements that you're trying to codify somebody's brain. And if you have a whole bunch of people who you can codify their brain on what they would do and you can get a computer then to keep doing that. And so the data they get, so if you bank half the households in the United States of America, you get a lot of data. A lot. And you don't get it from disparate places. Like a lot of us can buy data. We can buy credit card data. We can buy satellite pictures of people and how many people walk into a restaurant or a Walmart or on a highway or how many trucks come off of the ferry, whatever. We have it all in one place. We know the same person who does the same thing. And so with that data, you can start to figure out really important things that help you to manage money and we are like geeky about it, right? So here's some good news for the audience. When you retire, the year before you retire and the year after you retire are the two highest spending years, relatively speaking, that you will have through time, irrespective of your wealth level, which is really hard to understand. Because in your mind, and that's including healthcare costs, all the way through end of life. Because in our minds, all of us, again, irrespective of wealth, think, will I have enough money to retire comfortably? Can I afford to take care of if something really bad happens and the medical costs go soaring? And can I take care of my children? And so everybody runs retirement plans to try to work through that zone. And if you knew that zone was a little bit less, you can manage the portfolios much differently early on. And of course, the value of compounding when you change that much earlier on changes everything about those outcomes. So a lot of the work that we're doing gets us super excited about how we can help even more in the future. That is at like 2 o'clock. And then, I don't know, and then it just goes. It's never dull. It's at the center of lots of things. If you had asked me, during the crisis, the great financial crisis of which you wrote so many super intelligent things about what went wrong and how you try to prevent that in the future, that I don't know how you knew because you weren't sitting inside of a financial institution, and most everything else that I read about is just completely lost on what actually happens. It's actually the stuff that you talked about with the regulations that change and they have unintended consequences and people don't really understand them. And of course you can't sit in a room and believe what you hear because everyone that sits at your table you think has a vested interest of saying like the thing that they're trying to sell or make more money on or whatever. And so days back then were just super high stress. There was nothing fun or exciting about it. It was awful. Today's much different.
You have to travel a lot?
Have to travel is the really nice part about my job right now. I don't have to travel, I get to travel. And I get to go to all different places around the world. I'm on the U.S.-China Business Council, and that's just a very eye-opening part of what I do on the side as a representative of one of the financial institutions for our U.S.-China partnership, and a couple of the other firms in this room are represented on that council too. So a lot of places that you get to go and do those kind of things and meet clients from around the world and hear their issues and their perspectives from the local vantage point. It can be grueling on your body, but it's really great for your mind.
Good. I think everybody's got the impression it's a very big job. You mentioned China. Let's actually take this opportunity to back up and talk about the uncertainties that are affecting your clients' risk and return in the assets that you manage for them.
Yeah.
And let's get back to global issues like China in a minute, but start just domestically.
Sure.
Chairman Powell of the Fed is here today. He's going to talk tonight about monetary policy.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be fantastic. Is that the uncertainty about how the Fed sets monetary policy, is that a big deal for how you think about where to deploy your clients' assets?
It's the only thing that matters. Like, it's the only thing that matters. Because at the end of the day, anything you buy, whether it's the land around this great campus or a cannabis stock or a piece of a company, everything you do, you're trying to figure out how much money it's going to make in the future, and then you're trying to discount it back. And that discount rate is the most sensitive thing that's in the equation. That's it, period, end of sentence. And so all eyes are on the Fed, and they have a really hard job because they're supposed to do three things. Try doing this for a living. Full employment in the United States, stable prices in the markets, and moderate inflation, roughly 2%. Just try doing that. They're as close to perfect right now as you can imagine. Look at what we have, right? And so he has a really important mandate. He has to stay completely grounded in everything that's being talked about here, which is economic policy and long-term things. But he's got to bring into that everything that doesn't have a historical pattern to it. There's no historical models that tell you what the sharing economy has done to every number that we look at. Nothing. Nothing. Who would have imagined that you would share your house? We live in apartments in New York, but like that you would share your house with creepy people that would come in and live in it and like pay you money, and you'd be okay doing the same thing. Or that you wouldn't own a car, or you wouldn't even get a driver's license anymore. That's like inconceivable. And so everything about the sharing economy changes all economic models, all inputs to inflation, all of that stuff. And it's really hard for a government process to change that. So he's got to factor all that in. He can't listen to the noise of people telling him what he should and shouldn't do. He knows what he's supposed to do. He has an independent mandate. And he's now living in a market environment unlike any in the past, where it is so interconnected with the rest of the world that it's not like to try and control those three things that we just talked about. They're completely intertwined with what's happening in Europe and what's happening with China and what's happening in Japan and imports and exports and et cetera, that you know better than anybody. And so the mandate is really hard. What he says, how he thinks, you can read that all. What you guys get tonight is you get to see his eyes and his body language, and that's just a priceless thing, because you can see from the man how he's going to think about those things going forward. And I sit on something called the Investment Advisors Board for the Federal Reserve of New York, and that's where there's a series of about a dozen of us, mostly hedge fund managers, some private equity, and then a couple of us from the larger asset management firms. And we sit and talk with the New York Fed about the markets. So we're supposed to be the markets translation of what's happening. And you can, even in that conversation, you know the person who's managing the fixed income portfolio is saying what he wants to say because he wants his fixed income portfolio to and the person who's running the equities portfolio wants them to just be a little looser because he wants that.
Talking their books.
And it's just, so like, no wonder it's so hard. But it's the most important thing. And that's where a lot of just back to the data for a second, that's where a lot of the data is so important, because most of the things that we measure in economic policy are surveys, right? Here's a survey I love taking with our people, because this is like one of the basic things when we do all of our digital investing. How much money do you make? Like, you ask that to a person. Do you guess how many people answer that correctly? 0. No, literally 0. Which person, including yourself, do you know how much that after-tax dollar is, right? Multiplied by 12 months to know your actual annual income? Nobody. Not a human being in the world. So you get that number wrong. Okay, next question. How much is your annual spending? Well, you definitely get that wrong. And then it just goes on and on and on from there. And so that's why it's so hard to do what he does. But it's going to be easier with a lot of the big data that's going to be able to measure things that you could never measure before, and you can measure it on a real-time basis. And so we always talk about like the Fed governor having one day in the future, the Fed governor is going to have this like just big Wizard of Oz screen, and they're just going to like touch that dial up a little and touch that dial down a little, and you'll never go in to an overly exuberant market or a recession.
That'll be a long time.
Which is why, by the way, this whole like long recovery that we've been in, it's really long and almost incalculable, because when did we have zero interest rates before? And then when did you multiply that by the rest of the world? And if you take the cumulative GDP growth that we've had since 2009, we're at like year 4 of a regular recovery. So there's nothing that mathematically says you have to end this recovery, but we're all, ooh, it's so long, like how much longer can this last? And we have 606 days, I think, until the next presidential election. Not that anyone's counting down, but you think about all the things that are going. We're in year 3 of a 4-year term. It's normally the strongest of any of the 4 years in the stock market. Like there's a lot of things that could get you super excited about the markets, including China trade, and if that comes out in a positive manner, and you could keep going for a really long time. Yes, it'll slow down, and you may hit a technical recession, but the minute you say the word recession today, what goes into people's minds? 2008. Like 2008, just immediately. And
So actually, former Chair Bernanke joked at the last annual meeting of the American Economics Association in Miami about the fact that expansions rarely die of old age. Yes. They're most often murdered by the Fed.
Yes.
So
I wasn't going to say that, but you can say that.
But okay, so you've talked in general about the uncertainty associated with Fed policy, but right now, do you have a particular stance, defensively, offensively, or just strategically about the current rates environment and what the Fed might be doing in the next months?
Our public answer is that they're going to continue on hold for a little bit and watch. Inflation is not in any kind of a runaway scenario. They have a little bit more ammunition should something go wrong than they did just a couple of years ago. Remember, you could think about what's happening over the last couple of years as Fed tightening, or we like to think of it as Fed normalizing. Like they got to get it to normal in order to then either tighten or loosen. Without getting it to normal, there's not a lot they can do if we get into another sort of really bad scenario, and that's what you're seeing with Europe right now. Europe just printed a not so great GDP report yesterday, maybe, I don't know. And there's very little they can do. They're at zero interest rates. Just take Italy for 1 second, just to remind ourselves of how crazy things are over there. Italy, 50%, hang on to this statistic for 1 second, 50% of their junk bond market, 50, is trading below the yields of the US Treasury equivalent. By the way, that's down from 85% of the Italian bond market just 6 months ago that was trading below the US Treasury market. Okay? So they're pumping all they got, and you're buying anything you can, and that can't end normally. Maybe you should tell us how that ends, because I don't.
One of my colleagues at the University of Chicago, Luigi Zingales, is quite pessimistic about the Italian bond market. But coming back to your outlook, so you're basically saying Fed policy is probably even more important in the way that you do your job than, let's say, geopolitical uncertainty. Is that the case?
For sure. For sure. So this is also Michael Sembalist, who's John Lipsky knows well, and maybe some of you do too. He writes something called Eye on the Market for us, where we lock him in a closet for most every day. Like most portfolio managers, we escort them in the building in the morning. We feed them, we care for them, we don't let them talk to many people, and then we let them back out at the end of the day. Because first and foremost, they're somewhere on the spectrum, in a great way, and you need to keep them there, because if you try to tell them things and you try to normalize them, then they're just going to think like everybody else. You want them to think the way that they think. Michael being the penultimate of that. And so he has done a lot of work on this question of geopolitical things. So what do all of us worry about? Yes, we can talk about trade talks. We can talk about China. We can talk about we talked a lot for forever at the beginning of the year about the government shutdown and da-da-da-da. But most people worry most about geopolitical issues. What's going to happen in North Korea? What's happening in the Middle East? Why did we stop talking about Khashoggi? What is happening with India-Pakistan border right now? How do we think about that? And so those are really important things for all of us to think about from a policy position. But my job is to do something that's super hard, not that what I have to do is super hard, but to try to get our people to put hard, cold blinders on for those issues. Because in general, geopolitical issues have nothing to do with the stock market. In almost every time, from the Korean War to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan to the U.S. invasions that we've had, to the Falklands War, to the Korean War, to almost every single time a country has invaded another country in the post-war World War II era, only the Arab-Israeli crisis, which was the oil embargo, which then caused hyperinflation, was the only time that you actually saw it spill over into the stock markets for longer than a 6 to 12 months time period. So while that is important for all of us to care about for the world, it's really weird, but you just have to like erase it from your mind and go like this and move forward when you're thinking about valuations. So that's why when we look at valuations today, they're at about median levels, especially in the US, and they're very attractive. And if you get after tonight, depending on what he says, if he says he's going to sort of hold the rudder steady, the next investment is emerging markets equity, like all day long, because they're the end of that whip tail. That if the U.S. continues to be strong, and God willing, we get something with U.S. and China where we take the rhetoric down on the trade issues, because trade issues are direct translation to economic issues.
So those are not in the same batch of those other geopolitical issues.
Correct.
You think China trade is actually an
yes,
important
because that's not a geopolitical issue. It's an economic issue of fairness and how that translates. And I think from our work on the U.S.-China Business Council, as well as a lot of people that we rely heavily on for their advice, and one of them who's super strong on this topic is Dr. Henry Kissinger, who's on our International Advisory Board and spends a lot of time just trying to bring both sides just a little bit closer to having a good conversation with each other. If you kind of took the tone right now, it's much closer to something good is going to come out of this rather than a stalemate on both sides. But it's not in anyone's interest to have this go on much longer. And you can either kill each other on the way down, or you could try to grow out of it by one buying more goods and the other paying more equivalent tariffs, and you might be able to get to a pretty good spot.
So as the uncertainty about that starts to resolve, does that change the way that you manage your
Yes.
clients' assets?
Yes. We would.
In what way?
We would re-risk pretty heavily thereafter. And we're sort of equal risk right now, if you think about a balanced portfolio, within the minutiae of it, like the fixed income and the equities, we're sort of regularly balanced within fixed income, getting really nervous about the lower end of the investment grade market. For those of you who follow it, the triple B market, which is just at the border of when you can be considered investment grade, has gone from 1.5 trillion to 4.5 trillion in the past couple of years. The entire bottom of the market, the high yield market, is 1.5 trillion. So in a slowdown or something where like bad things happen in China, that stuff that's here, this 4.5 billion, chances of all of it staying at triple B are pretty low. So now, that comes in here. Well, any part of that coming in here doubles or triples the size of this thing, and there's not enough buyers of that can have. So there's all sorts of things that can happen, which is why people stay very cautious on that end. And then in equities, people are just a little bit nervous in this emerging market spectrum because, well, I'd rather just stay in the developed markets and wait and see. But if you think about from a dollar perspective as well as external, not relying on external funding as much today for these emerging markets countries, especially in Latin America, as they were many years past, you have a very good backdrop for at least a 2 to 3 year cycle of strong investments there. So we're hopeful, but our job is to constantly weigh the downside risk. So that's unfortunately where we have to spend most of our days.
Mixed in with this trade issue is competition issues and the ability of global firms to compete in China. I'd like to hear about how you look at that. How your business, or JP Morgan more generally, is coping with the challenges of competing inside China.
So many companies can own wholly owned subsidiaries in China, and that's what I would call sort of like level one. And then there's other companies that can only own a minority. All financial firms have historically been in that until recently. So that's below 49% and below. And then there's this middle tier, which is people changing in the middle. That's where we fall. I would say a couple of things. First of all, China's not going anywhere. And if you're a global firm, you must, if nothing else, understand what's happening in China. And if you care about the long-term value for your shareholders, you should probably operate in China. If for nothing else but to understand those buyers or sellers or one way or another. So for us specifically, like we're in China, we're going to be in China, we only own 49%, we're hoping for 51%. That's not going to change anything, by the way. Like if we kid ourselves and think we're going to be in full control at 51%, whatever. That's not going to happen. If you sat on the U.S.-China Business Council, you would hear a mixed array from the credit card companies to the ag companies to the energy companies and very importantly to the car companies who say, I mean, what do you mean am I going to be here or not? I make more cars here than I do in the United States of America. Of course I am. Is it a level playing field? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They give us emissions regulations 3 months after the cars have come off the line. Like, no. It's totally, fully controlled. The Walmart stores, there's the greeter that they give you in the front, who's there to monitor and watch, and like you just learn to live with it. And the hardest thing is, and I think this is, again, just to go back to Dr. Kissinger for a minute, because I think there are very few people in this world who have been through as much as he has on this topic, and he says things to me all the time that end with this same sentence. Don't ever go over there preaching the way that you do things in the United States of America as if like that's the answer. They have taken 850 million people out of poverty. They have cured 70% of the poverty problems of the world with that number. Extreme poverty has gone from 88% to 1.7% with relatively little problems from a uprising perspective. And so be very careful about preaching what it is that you think is their method to getting to where you are when, you haven't done that. And it's just a super important thing to keep in our minds because we're all frustrated with all the things. I don't understand why they don't have rule of law. I don't understand why I can't have a contract that I can rely on. I don't understand how they think they can. Well, it is just the way it is. And they're going to think in 100-year cycles and we're going to think in quarters. And you're going to have to find a way to make those two things operate. But if you want to be a global institution, you're going to have to figure that out. And so that's what we spend a lot of time doing. And there's a lot of smart people trying to make it work. And it's going to have some ups and downs. But I don't think the two countries are that far apart from the end goal of safety, stability, and growth. And so I don't know. So and then that may be a glass half full. It is definitely a glass half full perspective, but I hope we all think about that when they do come out of. I think they will come out with a positive, not scorched earth agreement to move forward, because the two countries are more reliant on each other than I think anybody realizes in terms of world order.
Yeah, let's hope rationality prevails. I want to come back, because we want to make sure we have a generous amount of time for everybody to ask questions. I want to come back full circle to the path that you described at the beginning, by which you achieved your current, very large responsibilities. I noticed just before we came in here, you were speaking with a young freshman in economics from Stanford, way in the back far corner. And I'm just thinking about him and other young people in the audience, women included, because it's very rare to see women.
It's International Women's Day, by the way.
It is?
Yes.
Well, okay. And I'm sure that all of the young people, and many of them, given the nature of this summit, are interested in careers in economics and finance. Is there anything that you can say that might be a guide to the younger people and women in that are here today? And I'm sure the people that are already well started on their careers will be interested as well.
Sure.
How you did this, or how you might advise others to do this.
Well, I don't know about the advice, because I think everybody has their own path. But by the way, on International Women's Day, because we do all these stats, of course, with all our big data in the company, someone gave me a stat today on our asset and wealth management business. There are more women today in my business, which is the 25,000 people that I oversee, than there were in all of asset and wealth management just 15 years ago. So the world is changing. That's nothing about JP Morgan. It's just the world is changing. That's super exciting. Opens up lots of opportunities for lots of people. So if you live on the East Coast, which some of you do, but very few of you do, because you're really smart, you figured out this. We didn't. We had a snow day on Monday. Kids had to stay home. Why on earth would you send your child to Wall Street when you could send your child here? Why? It's the world of disruption. It's excitement. It's like thinking broadly. It has much more appreciation for the environment and for the social good, and all that good stuff came out of the West Coast, and all that bad stuff came out of the East Coast. And some of that actually might be very true. And it would be great if the two could just merge. Think of the country, if we could do that. But what I say to myself, because you can't go into any job that you don't have a passion. Don't ever take a job where you don't have a passion for it. You may not know your end passion. By the way, nobody knows what they want to do when they're 21, 31, probably even 41. But you have to, when you get into it, no, there's an end goal, there's a mission. And so for me, my mission is I get to use this great part of this big firm where I have all the scale that all these disruptive companies want. They want to know how to figure out how to give nudges to someone to scrape the extra change every time they spend $2.79 at Starbucks, and how do you get the other 21 cents to go into an investment account to go in the... Got it. I got half of the households in the United States of America in our bank. I want to help them to do that at age 21. My mission is to get everything that all these gurus do, that John Lipsky created, all these disciples, and I take all their brains and I put it in AI and I stick it in a digital thing and I get them to just start saving early on. I hope I can change the trajectory of their retirement, the trajectory of their intelligence in financial matters, the trajectory of how they think about their kids, the trajectory of how they think about all that they're going to invest their money in, and making them smarter every time. Hey, people like you don't spend as much on beer. Just FYI. I'm not making a judgment, I'm just telling you, like every other, wouldn't that be great? It's not creepy big data. It's just like replaying it back to you, hoping that you help make smarter decisions. So like that's my passion, and I love it. And if you get people, and we have 250,000 of them that do work for JP Morgan Chase, and they have that, the branch teller, you know, down the street here at the Chase, he or she wants to help people to do things well. And so I think you can work in any of the industries. I love the financial services industry just because it is what makes the math of everything happen. But it's much more about the passion of what you do, and just like really, I have a friend of mine who's had an illness and has had like every bone in her body is a rod right now from Lyme's disease, like many years ago when they couldn't cure it. And she has this great saying, which I love: if you can't get out of it, get really, really into it. And so she's, of course, an expert on everything that has to do with her bones. But I say to people, like, sometimes there's bad parts of every job, but if you can't get out of it, or a really bad homework assignment that you've got this weekend, you're not getting out of it. You have to turn in that paper or that thing on Monday or Wednesday or whatever. So don't try to like mentally get out of it. Get really into it and make the most of it, and you may find a joy or a passion or a path that you didn't even know. Who would have thought that I love the data analytics and the quest for figuring out all the stuff that I do, and otherwise there's no point in having a job. You wouldn't do what you do for all these years. You don't rise to the top of your field unless you do. You have to have that passion.
So we're telling our students the same thing that you just said: follow your passions and stick to it.
And don't be nervous that you don't have one. I almost went to Hollywood.
Might have worked
Like,
out.
it's good to try lots of different things. The parents have a way of like, oh, I know you're going to be a doctor. Come on, let's do this and this and this and that. I find myself doing that with my middle child too. And you can't. They gotta find it their own way and try different things. And yeah.
Okay, let's see if anybody, after that opportunity to think about it, has a question for you, Mary. So there are microphones located, and they can chase you down. If you raise a hand, someone will come and find you. And I will. People are shy today. I don't see any hands raised. Mark, someone at your table?
So can you talk about the impact of tax reform? So that's been, hotly debated issue, and it's something that I talk a lot. I'm teaching Econ 1 right now to quite a few Stanford undergrads. I'll be talking about the tax reform next week. So I'm just curious if what from the front lines. I've seen some of the aggregate data, but I'm curious to hear your talk on the 2017 tax reform.
Yes. So your TA was here. Maybe he still is here, and trying to dissect the tax reform is like a super hard thing, and then to translate it to freshmen, it's like impossible. But good luck. So what are all the concerns of the tax reform? First of all, is it like a one-time thing, and then it goes away? No, a tax reform is permanent. All that money every year won't be taken out, and so hopefully it can be deployed back in. Be deployed back into a company, buying new property, plant, and equipment, being deployed for an individual to do savings, et cetera, except for if they don't have state and local tax deductions, and that's like a whole other thing. But for the general population, what we care about from a GDP perspective is what will the tax refund be? It's like a super hard thing to calculate. Turns out everyone's been doing hand-wringing all year for, oh God, the tax refunds won't be as big, people won't have as much money, that won't translate into summer spending and then back to school spending and and all the retail stocks go down. This morning, data came out that says, oh, turns out it's fine. It's going to be roughly the same because the deductions came up at the same level that the increases, deductions went up, increases went up, the two things offset, and it looks like the general public has tax refunds at almost the same level as last year, which is great for the economy. So like, again, scratch another thing off the worry list, which at the beginning of this year was, especially on December 24th, which was the low of the stock market, was a super long list of worries for the stock market. And so I would I would take that off. Now, I would put my mind forward to the 2020 elections, because lots of things can change, like lots and lots of things. And the job of people who are thinking about this from an academic and policy perspective is, like, there's just a lot of rhetoric out there in terms of socialist ideas and modern monetary theory, and is that even a thing, and isn't it, and socialist policies, and blah, 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 blah. And again, it's a little bit like what we do when we try to take out geopolitical issues for stock market purposes. Rhetoric isn't policy. And like trying to figure out what is like crazy rhetoric that won't turn into policy and what is like real rhetoric that might turn into policy is the task at hand. So I think that's where people are going to start to focus. And this whole worry about will tax refunds, it's going to disappear.
There's a hand right over here. If someone can find their way to this table.
I guess I'm just curious if you are or why you aren't more concerned about trillion-dollar deficits forever and, you know, what the longer-term implications of that might be.
Yes. So for sure. I mean, there's no such thing as borrowing forever. And I mean, there are people that run highly leveraged companies. Sometimes they go into bankruptcy, sometimes they don't. They can become heads of the country. They can, like, there's people that run, and there's nothing wrong with leverage. The question is sustained leverage and like who pays the final bill. And sustained leverage at today's interest rates is not. It's not like this is the whatever Goldilocks era, or whatever you want to call it. We're fine. That's not the problem. I mean, entitlement spending might be the problem. There's lots of problems in the problem, but that's not like the problem that we have right now. The problem that we have right now is if like just a little bit of peak in interest rates goes up, all that stuff gets multiplied. Like you have to pay. That's why tonight's talk on where is inflation in this world and therefore where are interest rates is the only thing that matters. It's like the only thing that matters. And so you just can't borrow forever and do that, and you can't borrow for the sake of the future of this country. But nobody wants to face that music. Now I'll give you some, because I heard like lots of stuff this morning was sort of frightening and depressing. Yes, debt levels are at their highest, right? So are asset levels. So is household net worth. Debt servicing levels are at their lowest. Is it because interest rates are lower, or is it because people are being more fiscally responsible? It looks like it's because they're being more fiscally responsible. One of our great worries after the 2008 crisis was that, for those of you who study this, you saw that the number of bankruptcies, personal bankruptcies, went up to record levels beyond measure in 2009 and 10. And then you take so you can be in the bankruptcy process is a 7-year cleansing, and then you go back at it and you can get credit again. So now you start to watch, does credit start creeping up? Are we going to have another thing? Is that the next thing that's going to throw us into the next cycle because people just like to borrow? You're the expert on this. Why am I answering this question?
It's because it's about you.
Please answer the second half after I finish really quickly this first half, which is that all of that actually doesn't look like it's headed back in the same direction. And so you're not seeing second lien mortgages at the rate that they were with the FICO scores that we can take, and 102% leverage on the house that you're buying in Arizona that you're never going to live in. And so there's the speculation is not there. Doesn't mean it couldn't be there, but right now it's not there. So all of those signs feel like they're okay. But your underlying question is the biggest long-term question. And
this is somebody raised the issue of modern monetary theory. I mean, that's a big debate, and there's a lot.
Where do you come out on the debate?
I think it's nonsense. The idea that no point in mincing words about it. It definitely matters. Even if there's a large fiscal capacity in the United States to borrow more today, doesn't mean that you don't have to pay it back, and that future generations won't be responsible for those debts.
That's right.
And so we need to be responsible about, when we need to borrow money to make sure that it's well spent and that it's only as necessary. There may be another hand. Yes, right here.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier your passion for data and AI and other sources of potential technological innovation. Let me ask you for a prediction with respect to the debate between passive and active management. If you wake up in the next 5 years or 10 years, where do you see that going, and how are you guys yourselves positioning for the change that seems like very
A
important?
little bit like modern monetary policy theory, which is crazy. Like the world didn't just change, and after all these years, like, nope, oh, just joking. You can borrow whatever you want, and it'll be fine. And we have these new, mathematical calculations that'll show you why it's fine. It's not fine. Active and passive is this weird thing. It's not like the human mind is not going to go away, and everyone just buys the largest 500 stocks in the world. That's the most important thing is people get invested. So passive, absolutely. We put billions of dollars into passive investments all the time. But I also run an actively managed part of our world. Why? Because at the end of the day, when you're trying to decide between soda company A and soda company B, they're both brilliant. They're both making lots of things. Some are moving faster into healthier foods than others. But at the end of the day, a human being has to look into the whites of the eyes of that CEO and say, do I think you're going to win? Or do I think you're going to win? They're going to ask them lots of questions, and there's no big data that's going to do that. There's no robot you're going to bring in the room and have the robot look at the two. And so until it's real artificial intelligence, smart people are going to decide on stock A versus stock B, country A versus country B, right? Startup company A versus startup company B. And so we talk about active versus passive as this like one's going to win and one's going to lose. They're both going to win. And just as this weird thing, the more passive wins, the more money goes into the I'm just buying the largest stocks, the more the people who are trying to make the decipher will be able to have that edge. Because they're not just saying I'm buying the 500 largest today because they were the 500 largest yesterday. They're saying I'm going to make a prediction on something in the future. They could be right or wrong. Lots of them are wrong. But they just have to be right more than 51% of the time. The real problem in this debate is fees. That's the real problem. Because you have a fiduciary obligation when you manage money to say, is my added value over time going to be above and beyond the fees that I'm going to charge? If it is, go for it. If you can't answer that honestly in your investment committee meeting every week, you are not in the right business.
Far over here on my left, there's a gentleman raising his hand.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. So I was just curious how you guys think about Brexit, both from an operational standpoint and also an investment standpoint. Do you think it's going to force the ECB's hand on monetary policy? And how do you price in what seems to be changing probabilities daily of, hard Brexit, disorderly Brexit? I mean, there's a million different scenarios that these politicians are throwing around, and how do you guys cut through it to deliver the best results?
You want to say anything?
I'm hoping it's still not going to happen, that there will be another referendum, and the people of the United Kingdom will become rational about this. But in the meantime, it's pretty scary for me. On behalf of the people of the United Kingdom, they could suffer significant disruption and downturn in growth. As for the European, the EU 27, the remaining countries in the Eurozone, it's a lot bigger economic area. So if you take the disruption in the UK, proportionately, it's going to affect the EU much less. And the ECB is already pedaling as fast as it can on monetary policy with its current problems. So I don't think it's going to be able to do much more. It's already using all of its ammunition to handle that. What do you think, Mary?
I would just add that the populism in the parliament and these votes that are coming up, I think it's May, it's like when our Congress turns over in the midterm elections, is a very important part of what's going to happen with the pan-European issues. From a combine that with the Brexit issues, they've set it up where they have like 3 votes right in a row. Can't remember the 3 dates, but it's like 1 and then 2 days later and then 2 days, which is probably the smartest thing that they've done because you have all this time lag in between. Remember, the first one happened almost like on a bad bet, like I lost a bet with someone and I was just joking. I didn't really mean to put that out there. And then next thing you know, it's out there. It's a super hard thing to think about the citizens of the UK and all of the terrible things that could happen. By the way, not because mean people from the EU want to do bad things, because that's just what the law says. Like, you are not allowed to import X into the country if hard Brexit happens. You can have shortages, you can have things, you can have border things break down, you can have all sorts of like totally crazy third derivative problems that we haven't thought of. And so that's really important. I was on a panel in Davos earlier this year with Christine Lagarde, who is in the center of most of this. And all I can tell you is, like, if we think that we know what's happening, and she doesn't, so she says at the end of the panel, there's a lot of us really thinking through this. We're all trying to come around and make very smart decisions, which of course they are, and they have very brilliant people trying to do it. She goes, all I know is buy parking lots in northern France. That was her only advice.
Time for a last question. Does anyone have a desperate question to ask?
One more over here. Right over there.
Way over.
Yeah, right here.
I'll just start talking. Hi.
There she is.
I have one more Women's Day related question to ask you. So in academic economics, we've recently realized that there are some structural barriers for women and members of other represented groups rising in our profession. And so I'm curious if you see structural barriers in your industry related to women and maybe members of other underrepresented groups, and if so, what might be done to change that?
Just because it's the end and we have 45 seconds left, I just make this super short. I think it is crazy, and I think technology changes everything. Everything. Everything about having to be somewhere during X amount of hours with FaceTime and things. And I use this analogy because, especially here, and I came up with this analogy actually last summer when I was sitting outside of the gymnastics center over there waiting, and I met with Katie Ledecky, who's a friend of my cousin's. They're all in the Olympics together. And I thought to myself, if Katie Ledecky or any of the 20 people you send to the Olympics every year from this school said, hey, I'm going to take 3 months off to train for the Olympics, would you say, I don't know if you're ever going to make it back in the industry. We might give your job away. I think you might lose your edge if you're out for 3 months. I'm not sure. No, you wouldn't say that. But that's what we say to people that take maternity or paternity leave. I mean, that's what we said. We don't say that in today's world. It's the same thing. It's like a crazy concept. And we just need to move past it. And we need to be smarter about having flexible, lots of things. You can do, most everyone in this room works 24/7, one way or another. You work in your car. You work when you're going to bed. You're on the damn thing all the time. And that changes everything. It changes the ability for anyone of any background, of any time in their life, because it's really a time in their life thing. It's not a gender or a color of your skin. It's just time in your life where you're taking your priorities, and some are more important than others at certain times. Whether it's taking care of an elder parent, and you need that time to do it, and so we all just got to move beyond it. And the companies that have, and the schools that have, and the educational faculty departments that have, they're the places you want to go work, and the places you want to go to school, and the places you want to be. And so embracing all of that is one of the most important things you can do. I saw a bunch of pamphlets out there about stuff that you all are working on here, and I just applaud it immensely, and I hope someday we are not talking about any of this.
Okay, with that, thanks very much, Mary and Darrell. That was great.